Have you ever stood a little too close to a campfire and felt lightheaded, maybe even a little dizzy, from the smoke drifting straight into your face? Ancient humans lived like that every single night for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone ever chose to smoke anything on purpose. By the end of this video, you will know exactly when humans went from breathing smoke by accident to deliberately getting high on it. And the twist in between is stranger than you would guess. Most people assume smoking started with a pipe or a rolled leaf or eventually a cigarette. Something a person picked up and lit on purpose. That is roughly where the story of smoking usually starts in most people's heads. A deliberate habit picked up somewhere in recorded history, spreading from one culture to the next. It turns out that is not even close to the real beginning. Long before any human decided to breathe in smoke deliberately, they were already breathing it in every single night, with zero choice involved at all. Most people also assume tobacco itself is an old habit from somewhere in Asia, Europe, or the Middle East, since that is where so many other ancient traditions come from. Tobacco is actually a New World plant, native to the Americas, which already breaks the assumption most people are working from. And long before that, there is an even stranger detour along the way, one that has nothing to do with anyone getting high at all. Once early humans learned to keep a fire burning, that fire usually sat inside or right at the mouth of a shelter, since that was the safest, warmest place to be. Which means the smoke had nowhere to go but into the space where people were sleeping, eating, and talking, night after night. A small stone shelter with no chimney and no real airflow is about the worst possible place to put a fire if you are trying to avoid breathing in smoke. And it is exactly where humans put theirs for most of history. Scientists have found chemical traces of that smoke still preserved in the hardened plaque on ancient teeth, in remains going back an almost unbelievable length of time. That plaque works almost like a tiny time capsule, trapping whatever was in the air around a person and holding onto it for hundreds of thousands of years until someone finally knew how to look for it. This is not a case of finding one single unlucky person either. Researchers found this exact same chemical smoke signature preserved in teeth from two completely separate cave sites on two different continents, separated by hundreds of thousands of years from each other. Long before modern humans even existed as a species, all the way back to some of our earlier ancestors, that same smoke was already settling into their lungs. For almost the entire span of that time, nobody had a chimney, a vent, or any real way to redirect smoke out of a living space. That basic piece of engineering simply had not been invented yet. That means smoke exposure was not a habit or a choice. It was just what breathing indoors near a fire meant for hundreds of thousands of years straight across an entire branch of the human family tree. You do not have to guess what all that smoke did to the human body, because in a few remarkable cases we can actually see it directly. A naturally preserved body found frozen in the mountains, thousands of years old, had lungs stained black with soot. The kind of damage you would expect from a lifetime spent breathing in smoke near indoor fires. That is not even what ended up killing him. He died from a completely separate injury, and the soot-blackened lungs were just something he had been quietly carrying around for years beforehand. A different preserved body, this one thousands of years old and found in a completely different part of the world, showed the same basic pattern: blackened lung tissue along with damage to the lung's own structure. This particular body belonged to someone who had held a respected religious role in life, carefully wrapped and prepared after death with real skill and care. None of that status or careful preparation changed what decades of breathing indoor smoke had already done to her lungs. Two ancient people from two unrelated cultures on opposite sides of the world who almost certainly never met, never traded, and never influenced each other in any way, both carrying the exact same kind of internal damage. And this is not just two unlucky, isolated cases either. That same soot-blackened pattern keeps turning up again and again in preserved remains pulled from very different cultures and continents, wherever archaeologists have thought to actually look for it. It is worth remembering that neither of these two people did anything unusual for their time. They were not unlucky exceptions, and they were not living in some especially smoky or dangerous version of ordinary ancient life. This damage was simply what an ordinary life near fire looked like for almost everyone. Not from smoking in the modern sense, from simply living indoors near a fire like almost every human before them. At this point you might be wondering why humans did not just take the fire outside, or find some other way to stay warm without filling their own lungs with smoke every night. The honest answer is that fire was worth it by an enormous margin, and the body count proves it. Humans who used fire outcompeted humans who did not, smoke damage and all. A fire meant food that lasted longer. Meat held directly in the rising smoke above a low flame dries out and keeps for weeks instead of days, lighter to carry too, which mattered enormously to people who moved constantly to follow food. Cooking food over that same fire also made it dramatically easier for the body to digest, unlocking more usable energy from the exact same piece of meat or root vegetable than eating it raw ever could. A fire also meant warmth through cold nights, light to keep working after dark, and a real deterrent against large predators that would otherwise treat a sleeping human as an easy meal. So the trade was simple. A little bit of smoke damage spread out over an entire lifetime in exchange for food, warmth, light, and safety. Most humans took that deal without a second thought because the alternative was worse. Here is the part that is genuinely wild. The human body itself did not just tolerate that trade, it adapted to it. Certain gene variants that help the body break down toxic smoke compounds show up far more often in ancient human lineages that spent the most generations living closely with fire. Researchers can actually trace some of these protective gene variants back through ancient DNA itself, comparing which versions show up most often in populations with the longest, deepest history of living closely with fire versus populations without that same history. In other words, evolution itself was quietly building a defense against something humans had already been doing to themselves for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone understood what smoke even was. Here is the part that catches almost everyone off guard. Before there is any solid evidence that humans deliberately breathed in smoke themselves, there is evidence that they used smoke on somebody else first. In parts of the world, some of the very earliest attempts at preserving a body after death did not use any embalming chemicals at all. They used smoke, slowly drying a body out over a low fire, the same basic principle as smoking meat to preserve it. Whoever figured this out had clearly already spent a long time paying close attention to exactly what steady, controlled smoke does to something over time, the same slow drying and preserving effect, just applied to a person instead of a meal. It likely was not about ritual at first either. In warm, humid places, a body left untreated does not last long, and a slow, steady fire was one of the only reliable tools available to actually slow that process down. Long before anyone chose to inhale smoke into their own lungs on purpose, humans had already figured out what steady, controlled smoke could do to a body, and used it on the people they had lost. So when did a human actually choose smoke on purpose for the first time? The oldest solid evidence we have is not a fancy pipe or a special ritual object. It is something almost embarrassingly simple. A handful of small charred seeds from a wild tobacco plant, sitting inside a tiny fireplace in a site out in the desert. This was not a lush, resource-rich valley either. It was a harsh, dry desert environment, the kind of place where small foraging groups had to know every single plant around them intimately, just to survive. This happened right around the time the last ice age was finally ending, one of the biggest shifts in climate and landscape humans had ever lived through, forests and grasslands changing shape all around them. Whoever left those seeds there was almost certainly burning the plant and breathing in the smoke deliberately, thousands of years before anything we would recognize as a cigarette, a pipe, or a modern tobacco crop existed. Then leaning in slightly and breathing in on purpose, for what the evidence suggests was the very first time a human ever did that. It is worth sitting with how small that discovery actually was. Not a temple, not a painted cave wall, just a handful of burned seeds someone left behind in a fireplace, in the middle of an empty desert, with absolutely no idea they were leaving behind the oldest known proof of a habit that would eventually spread across the entire planet. It is the oldest known moment where smoke stopped being something that just happened to a person and started being something a person chose. Once humans started intentionally choosing plants for their smoke, tobacco was not the only one. In one striking case, archaeologists found small wooden burners, buried right alongside human bodies in a cemetery that had clearly been used to burn a much stronger, more psychoactive plant. Chemical testing on the residue left inside those burners showed unusually high levels of the exact compound responsible for getting a person high, far higher than you would expect from an ordinary wild plant. Whoever placed that burner there had access to trade networks reaching across a huge stretch of territory, since this particular psychoactive plant did not grow anywhere near where the burial actually took place. Somebody carried it a very long way, specifically for this moment. This was not a casual habit. It was placed deliberately inside burial chambers, almost certainly as part of a ritual or a mourning practice tied to death itself, not something done for a quick escape from boredom. In a completely separate part of the world, thousands of miles away, another ancient culture was inhaling a different psychoactive plant altogether, ground into a fine powder and smoked or snorted, as part of what appears to be a widespread spiritual tradition across an entire region. Getting high for these early humans was not really about relaxing or having fun. It looks a lot more like a tool used deliberately on purpose to reach some kind of altered spiritual state that an ordinary waking mind could not reach on its own. That second culture did not just inhale the powder loosely. They built dedicated kits for it, carved bone tubes for inhaling the snuff straight up through the nose, small spoons for measuring it out, and flat carved trays for grinding the seeds down in the first place. At the height of this practice, something like 1 in every 5 adult men in the region regularly used these psychoactive snuffs, before the habit almost completely disappeared a few centuries later for reasons that still are not fully understood. Archaeologists have even recently found a small sealed stone chamber at an ancient site in the Andes, packed with exactly this kind of snuffing equipment, tucked away like a private room built specifically for the purpose. A version of that same instinct, using a substance deliberately to reach for something beyond the everyday, is still recognizable in ritual and ceremonial practices all over the world today. Put all of that together, and the real story of smoking looks nothing like the simple timeline most people imagine. It does not start with a person choosing to light something up. It does not even start with a plant, a ritual, or a spiritual reason of any kind, the things most people would guess if you ask them cold. It starts hundreds of thousands of years earlier with smoke humans never asked for filling the exact same air they breathed, slept in, and raised their children in, a cost their own bodies eventually adapted to carry. Only much, much later did a human finally choose to inhale that same smoke on purpose. And even then, it was less about pleasure and more about ritual, mourning, and something bigger than themselves. Here is the strange part for you tonight. This is not just an ancient problem either. Right now, today, millions of households around the world still cook their daily meals over an open indoor fire, breathing in that same smoke every single day, exactly like the shelters at the start of this video. Health researchers now estimate that smoke from indoor cooking fires contributes to millions of early deaths every single year, making it one of the largest environmental health risks anywhere on the planet. And it comes from the exact same basic cause as the ancient damage this whole video has been tracing. Wildfire smoke drifting into a city, secondhand smoke in a shared space, even smoke from your own stove if the room is not ventilated, still leaves the same kind of trace in human lungs that scientists can find in bodies thousands of years old. Your own body still carries some of that same ancient defense, quietly working in the background every single time you walk through a smoky room without even noticing it. The parts of that story you actually get to control keep growing too, though. A working chimney, an open window, a simple vent fan over a stove, all things that flat out did not exist for almost the entire span of this video are enough to undo most of that risk today. So the question worth sitting with is this. If smoke has been quietly leaving its mark on humans since long before anyone ever chose to breathe it in, how much of what settles into your own lungs today do you actually have a say in? If you want a simple way to track your own exposure and actually do something about it, I made a short guided checklist for spotting the everyday sources of smoke and air damage most people never think to check. Link is in the description. Either way, the next time you catch a whiff of smoke from someone's chimney, a passing wildfire, or even just a candle in a closed room, You are catching a tiny piece of one of the oldest, strangest threads running through the entire human story. Subscribe for more questions about ancient humans actually answered. What should we figure out next? Leave it in the comments.